Hello, my name is Luke Walker with the West Virginia Autism Training Center. Welcome to our presentation on sensory solutions. Today we'll explore how the sensory system impacts behavior and learning, the importance of self-regulation and how sensory strategies can help everyone, developing proactive strategies from a sensory-based perspective. Here is a recap of the functions of behavior. Remember from the principles of behavior session, the sensory, either accessing or avoiding it, can be a very powerful contributor to behavior. This session will look more specifically at just the sensory component. Our sensory experiences include sight, touch, smell, sound, and taste. We all learn about our 5 main senses in science class, and these are pretty straightforward. They help us take in and understand what is happening in the world. They help to form an accurate picture of what we can and may want to do to interact with that world. But our senses also include 2 more systems less commonly learned about in grade school: movement and balance, and body awareness. And while they are a little harder to see, they have an enormous impact on how we move through the world and navigate our environment. And while we look at the 7 different systems and try to understand them by themselves, in truth they are quite often working together. Vision, touch, and proprioceptive in particular often have to collaborate and get along if a person is going to make sense of what they see and put it together with what they feel and how they move. Imagine you have visual perception problems and some movement balance issues. How would you feel if you had to walk across this room every day? Sudden tantrums and refusals to move forward or participate may be rooted in sensory problems and not just non-compliance or bad behavior. Take a few minutes after this session to view this short video. In it, our guy talks about having big cups, meaning no matter how much input he wants, he just can't get enough. This can often be the case for the senses for movement and gravity, and then we see kids constantly seeking to hang, pull, climb, or spin. And if the child has a little tiny cup or is over-responsive, then just a little bit of input can be painful or overwhelming. This is often the case for sights and sounds. So again, from a behavior perspective, your child will seek out those sensory experiences he likes or where he needs more input, and he will escape by any means necessary those sensory experiences that he finds overwhelming, uncomfortable, or aversive. If a child is unable to respond to certain sensory information by planning and organizing what needs to be done in an appropriate and automatic manner, this may cause a primitive survival technique called fright, flight, and fight, or withdrawal response, which originates from the primitive brain. As a parent, it can be useful to try and determine how your child's unique sensory system is set. Some children will be able to tell you themselves, while others may take a little detective work or a consultation with your child's occupational therapist. You can even do one of these with your child and talk about your own senses. For example, my vision will be set at +7 or higher because I am very sensitive to light and prefer my sunglasses even on a cloudy day. But my nose, thankfully, is maybe -3, since I don't smell things a lot of other people do. But sensory input is more than just about a type of behavioral response to input. It also helps us to do many other things, like learn and attend. In this way, if we change or vary the sensory input, we can change how well we can do some of these things. Our sensory input can also affect how we interact with the environment, our level of self-esteem, our level of self-control, and how we express feelings. It's helpful to think of your body as an engine. We all move through periods of high, low, and just right for learning throughout our day. Most of us use sensory strategies to keep ourselves functioning without even being aware of it. When having to sit through a class, how many of you like to have something in your mouth, bounce, or tap your foot? If you're asked to remain absolutely still, even if you are genuinely comfortable, most of you will actually find it more difficult to attend than if you can fidget in some way. You will quickly see that the body was really not designed to be perfectly still and pay attention. We all use our senses to adjust our engines as needed, from needing our hot cup of coffee to wake up, it's not just the caffeine, to dowsing the lights when it's time to sleep. We expect younger, typical children to have greater difficulty and need more guidance, and our expectations increase as they get older, but those with autism may always need support. But we all use our senses to self-regulate. We just do so more easily and usually without much thought. Sometimes we want our engines on high or low. It's just not the best state for learning and attending. Self-regulation means your body is able to get to the appropriate levels at the appropriate time or activity. And running low, very low, is what we need to go to sleep. Getting to sleep and staying asleep is a very common challenge for those with ASD, but sensory-based bedtime routines can be very helpful. Most of us have discovered ways to keep ourselves attentive when necessary, within reasonable limits, and as adults we generally have the freedom to move, get a cup of coffee, step outside for a moment, and then come back to what we were doing. And we also tend to learn to tolerate substitutes when we will be stuck in a meeting, on a plane, or a long car ride. Problems can also arise when there is a mismatch between the arousal level and task demands. Challenges are going to happen when sensory needs are intense, but denied or accessed in inappropriate ways. Think about the witching hour for kids, just before dinner. Parents are pretty low, and kids may be high, or in many cases, they too are low, except they look high because they are trying to bring themselves up to keep themselves from falling asleep. This is when we get irritated, frustrated, and likely yell or snap at minor things. People with ASD simply have more frequent and intense needs in this area, and they need our help and assistance in using sensory strategies to help them adjust their body's engines. The typical process of sensory integration begins before birth and continues throughout life, with the majority of SI development occurring before the early teenage years. For most children, sensory integration develops in the course of ordinary childhood activities. For some children, sensory integration does not develop as efficiently as it should. This is known as sensory integration disorder, SID, or sensory processing disorder, SPD, and is very common in children with ASD. Here are some sensory challenges. An individual might be overly sensitive to stimuli, the little cup, underreactive to stimuli, the big cup, easily distracted or unable to attend, and have difficulty completing tasks, an activity level that is unusually high or unusually low. They might have physical clumsiness or apparent carelessness, and they may have social and or emotional problems. Some additional challenges include individuals being impulsive and lacking in self-control, difficulty with making transitions from one situation to another, an inability to unwind or calm themselves, a poor self-concept, delays in speech, language, or motor skills, or delays in academic achievement. An occupational therapist must do an evaluation to diagnose sensory challenges and may plan a program of activities called a sensory diet. A sensory diet is designed to meet the individual needs of each child's nervous system, and activity should be guided by the child's interests. A good occupational therapist that focuses on sensory integration can be worth their weight in gold, and it is important that your child and the occupational therapist have a positive working relationship and that the activities are engaging for the child. That doesn't mean that at times the occupational therapist should not challenge your child to step up his game and tolerate more than they thought they could. Common sensory issues. Overly sensitive to sounds. It's actually painful. Unable to filter out sounds. Make it impossible to focus or learn. Overly sensitive to light. Can be painful or seizure-inducing. An intense need to rock or spin, to calm or stimulate. Pushing on tables, hanging on people or rails. Running into people or objects as if careless or on purpose. We have touched upon many of these common issues, but it is important to view what your child is doing through a sensory lens so you can begin to think about ways to help them. Using sensory strategies. Help your child to find the most effective and appropriate strategies, as well as how, when, and where to use them. Because their sensory needs are more intense than typical children, they need extra help in coming up with solutions to meet their needs. Find strategies that meet the need in a manner acceptable for the environment and situation. For example, a child starts to act up due to anxiety or sensory overload, or an inability to sit still, maybe a church or a restaurant. You can leave the situation if possible, but know this is not always going to be possible. So what can you do to help? Or how can you minimize the problems? Find an alternate location to wait, or give a time for how much longer. You could block sensory input using sunglasses or headphones, or you could offer more sensory input, such as fidgets, chewies, massages, or squeezes. Over time, you may find ways to increase your child's ability to cope while still supporting and meeting their needs. Repeated exposure of short duration or a milder intensity could help, or alternate input may distract while building intolerance. Here are some strategies for adjusting engine levels, or self-regulation. They can be effective in both directions depending on the individual. They can involve movement, like jumping, walking, touch, like hand fidgets or massage, listening to soft or upbeat music. It could involve sucking, blowing, or chewing gum, or dimming the lights, or lifting the shades. You can select strategies with an occupational therapist if possible, and in relation to the type of need and sensitivity. In review, getting or escaping sensory experiences are often at the root, the function, of challenging behavior. All the different sensory systems can be used to help self-regulate our bodies or adjust our engines. Sensory insight and consideration can be key to proactive strategies that prevent challenging behaviors and improve everyone's quality of life. Remember that sensory input does not have to be provided by special expensive equipment. Check out our Pinterest page for a range of ideas for homemade strategies.